Good morning and afternoon, everyone. My name is Aaron Carell, and thank you for participating in today's 971st Justice Clearinghouse webinar, Emotional Intelligence and Making Better Decisions. Emotional intelligence is a key component of decision-making, and research shows that those with a high level of emotional intelligence make better decisions, are more motivated, display a higher level of empathetic understanding, and are less susceptible to an amygdala hijacking. During our webinar today, Tom Dworak will introduce you to the 5 pillars of emotional intelligence and tactics to increase EI. Tom will also take a look at several mental and thinking models to assist the criminal justice professional with their decision making. Tom Dworak is a retired sergeant from a suburban Chicago police department, where he was the field training and evaluation program coordinator and the lead defensive tactics use of force instructor. As founder and lead instructor of the Adaptive Way, he developed and facilitates the Adaptive FTO. Tom's knowledge of experiential learning, emotional intelligence, critical thinking, creative problem solving, and decision making shaped the Adaptive FTO into a program for the changing training environment field training officers and their trainees find themselves in daily. And now briefly before we begin, I'd like to share with you some information about Justice Clearinghouse. The Justice Clearinghouse is the only peer-to-peer multidisciplinary educational program for justice professionals that offers the instruction and skills necessary to achieve both individual and organizational transformation. Through our year-round virtual conference, our audience and members develop those crucial skills that are necessary to positively impact themselves and their communities. And while anyone can attend our live webinars, our paid members are able to access this content on their own schedule, with over 950 hours of recorded sessions, and are also eligible to receive certificates of attendance that may be used when seeking continuing education credits. So if you're not presently a member, I would invite you to join today and support our work. Now, the last few things I'd like to address with everyone is some basic housekeeping items. First, this event is being recorded and the formal presentation is scheduled to last about 60 minutes. It will be available to members on the Justice Clearinghouse website. Second, this is a listen-only event, but you can type in any questions you have through the GoToWebinar toolbar, and we'll take as many of those questions as possible at the end of the formal presentation. We have incorporated several polling questions into this webinar, and you'll need access to your mouse to participate. Just by way of a trial run, I'd like to ask the first question, which is, what time zone are you in? Are you in the Eastern time zone, Central time zone, Mountain time zone, Pacific time zone? Or if you're in some other time zone, maybe Alaska, Hawaii time zones, please do click other. Or if you're in a country outside of CONUS, also indicate other. And I know we have several folks from, in fact, one from Portugal and several from Canada and so on. So thank you all so much for sharing that. Just to let you know, 41% of you are on the Eastern Seaboard, 22% are Central Time, 19% are Pacific Time, 15% are Mountain Time, and 3% are outside of those CONUS time zones. Again, thank you so much. Now, I did want to point out that Tom has provided several handouts on the GoToWebinar toolbar under the handout section. They include a resource sheet and a list of upcoming trainings that he is going to be facilitating and teaching at. Finally, after today's presentation, there will be a follow-up survey, and we ask that you complete it. Your feedback is shared with our presenters and helps shape everything we do here at Justice Clearinghouse. And with that, I'll go ahead and turn the presentation over to you, Tom. Tom, you may end up having to click that opening slide title page one time. There we go. Tom, it's all yours.
Great, Aaron. Thank you. Good morning, good afternoon to everybody, and welcome to our foreign visitors too. It's nice to have an international flair that we're here. And today we're going to talk about and discuss a little bit about emotional intelligence and decision making and how one influences the other. When we look at Darwin, we can go all the way back to 1809 when he talked about, it's not just necessarily the strongest or the most intelligent that survived, but this is the one that's most responsive to change. Two things I know about folks in the criminal justice system is that we hate the way things are, but we also hate the change. Yeah, but we gotta pick one, right? And how we adapt to the circumstances and the things that we see constantly evolve. They change all the time. Nothing in the world is static except for death and taxes, I think. So let's get started in terms of where are we heading today, right? And first, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about emotional intelligence and how can give you some simple, easy, quickly implemented tips to increase your emotional intelligence. And then secondly, we're going to look at a couple of tools to help us make better decisions in that complex, uncertain environment that we as criminal justice professionals find ourselves in. And so that, just to kind of start this off from a polling question, Aaron, you get that first one up?
I'm opening up that right now. Go ahead, Tom.
Cool. And how much training does your organization provide you in emotional intelligence? Is it 16 hours? Is it 8 hours, 4 hours, 2 hours, or none?
Perfect. And we are accumulating those votes. We'll leave it open, Tom, for about another 10 seconds or so.
Good.
I've got to say, I am kind of surprised at the results here frankly, at how little training is provided in EI with most of our attendees. So I'm going to go ahead and close it out, and I'll share those results with everyone. 69% of you indicated no training in emotional intelligence. 13% said 2 hours. 9% said 4 hours. 5% said 8 hours. And only 4% of you indicated 16 or more hours. Back to you, Tom.
Thank you, Aaron. And here's the thing. While we might, it's not that we don't want to confuse emotional intelligence with other types of training. There are elements of emotional intelligence training that do come out primarily in ethics, maybe in ethics training, definitely in de-escalation, decision making, or even from some of the implicit bias training that organizations may go through. All have components of emotional intelligence in there. So maybe that 69% isn't as low as an accurate representation. Although I would like to work with those folks whose organizations give them 16 hours or more, because that's a good start. So when we look at emotional intelligence, right? Brains may get you the job, but IQ or emotional intelligence, EQ, is what helps you manage relationships, and that's what really gets us ahead. I'm sure we all have really smart friends who struggle on the people side of things. Their affect may be off when they talk to someone. They say things inappropriately or in inappropriate circumstances, and don't realize that the impact of it is what they're saying. And in our business, on the criminal justice side of this, sometimes being too analytical can be a hindrance to us, especially when things happen at the speed of life. At the same time, we don't want folks too far over on the low side of EQ, because they might struggle with complicated financial investigations or comprehending case law. But it's nice if we get the two of them to marry up, where we get we get some really good, smart, intelligent folks, and then work on and who are also really good at managing relationships. So when we look at what is emotional intelligence, it's a form of intelligence like anything else, but it's a form of intelligence and how we identify and manage not only our emotions and being able to relate and identify with the emotions of others. When we look at the 5 pillars, it's self-awareness, self-regulation, motivation, empathy, and social skills. The first 3 are about ourselves. It's about how we react or respond to what we view through our personal lens of the world. Empathy and social skills is how we interact with others. Just about all of our training classes that I do includes emotional intelligence in there, because it really is an important piece of law enforcement training, whether it's corrections, probation, telecommunications, right? And so if you're interested please reach out about hosting a class, reach out. I'll put my contact information up at the end of the webinar, and we'll get something, we can definitely get something put together. Emotional intelligence really is timeless. It may not have been called emotional intelligence thousands of years ago, but we can go back all the way to Sun Tzu, who wrote The Art of War, where he said, if you know the enemy and you know yourself, you need not fear the results of 100 battles. Again, it goes back into that theory of being in control of yourself to succeed. We can look about another 1,000 years ahead to Marcus Aurelius in Meditations. Right? And he said, remember that your ruling reason becomes unconquerable when it rallies and relies on itself, so that it won't do anything contrary to its own will, even if its position is irrational. How much more unconquerable is its judgments if its judgments are careful and made rationally. Therefore, the mind freed from passion is an impenetrable fortress, and a person has no more secure place of refuge for all time. And what he's saying there is that with proper training, we can change our default habits, right? We can train ourselves to give up being angry so we don't get upset every time somebody says something to us that aggravates us. You can train yourself to avoid gossip by walking away from it, not participating in it. And we can train our brains to respond instead of react when we face uncertainty or dealing with things that are unknown. And for us in the criminal justice realm, uncertainty and not knowing are scary places to be because we're control freaks, right? But in just about any circumstance or any incident that we're at, the only person that we can control is ourselves. But we have to be able to control our emotions first. Finally, we come full circle and we get back into present day, and we look at what Daniel Goleman says. Right? And I'm a follower of Goleman's beliefs of emotional intelligence. They're all relatively the same. They have little differences here and there. But Goleman says if your emotional abilities aren't in hand, if you don't have self-awareness, if you're not able to manage your distressing emotions, if you can't have empathy and have effective relationships, it doesn't matter how smart you are, you're not going to get very far. Right? So you got to have control of your emotions, otherwise they're going to control you. So let's take a look a little bit more in depth at the 5 pillars individually, and give you some tips on how we can develop some sustainability moving forward in each one of those. The first is self-awareness. People who are highly self-aware have a pretty good understanding of emotions, and because of this, they don't let their feelings rule them. They're confident because they trust their intuitions and they don't let their emotions get out of control. They're also willing to take a good hard look at themselves. They know what their strengths and weaknesses are, and they're not afraid to work on those areas so they can perform better. Many believe that this self-awareness piece is the most important part of emotional intelligence. So how do we get better at this self-awareness piece? Slow down. Right? One of the things that we preach a lot in, especially in the law enforcement side, the kids in the academy, to the FTOs and that, is get your folks to slow down. They'll think better. They can only think so fast, and trying to think faster doesn't make it better, right? But when you experience anger or other strong emotions, slow down. Try to examine why, right? And remember that no matter what the situation is, you always have a choice in terms of how you're going to react to it. I have a question for you. When your emotions are disruptive, what do you feel? Right? What does it feel like when your emotions get disruptive? And if I can get you just to type those in the chat box, and when they kind of start coming in, Aaron, just kind of just give me a few, and let's see what the folks come up with. Because identifying those emotions it really is the first clue in terms of what it feels like. Right? And if I know, I get a tightness in the back, I get a pain in my lower extremity, hairs on the back of my neck stand up, those type of things, they all start to give me insight in terms of what I'm going through.
Got it. And Tom, we do have a number of folks that are that have entered some thoughts. Anxiety definitely wins for the number one, but we've also got anger, frustrated, out of control, agitated, heart racing, stomach tight, just to name a few. Thank you all for participating in that.
Great, and they're all negative too, which is usually when I do this, and even in live classes, the answers are almost always negative. We almost never get positive ones in terms of like, what does it feel like when we're happy? We always have this association and emotions of being negative. Next one is self-regulation. This is the ability to control your emotions and the impulses. You know, people who can self-regulate generally don't allow themselves to become too angry or jealous, and they don't make careless or impulsive decisions. They think before they act. It's being able to keep those emotions in control. It's to control outbursts, calmly discuss disagreements, avoiding activities that may undermine your emotional control, like having a self-pity party, or saying inappropriate things. Every agency, has a fire starter. And if it's you and nobody's told you yet, you're a problem. And we really don't like working with you and having to clean up the mess after it's over. Right? So it's really identifying from that self-awareness piece when those emotions are starting to get disruptive, and then what strategies can we employ to have better control over them. Right? So how do we improve these? First off is know your values. Right? What are the things in your life that are non-negotiable? Right? What are those things that you're absolutely not going to compromise on? When you spend that time examining what your code of ethics are, you know what's most important for you, and then you're not going to have to think when you face a moral, ethical decision. The choice is just going to be there because we live by what those values are. Hold yourself accountable. And to me, when we get into dealing with new recruits, new trainees, and that this acceptance of accountability really is the first lesson, to me, is the first lesson in leadership. If you tend to blame others when something goes wrong, stop it. Right? When decisions get made, the decision is yours. Right? Own it, accept it, face the consequences, whatever they are. Right? The majority of people, when we go to make our decisions, we're trying to do it from a standpoint of we want to make something better. It doesn't always work, so we learn from it and we move on. If you hold yourself to this level of accountability, you're probably going to sleep better at night, and you're going to earn the respect of those around you. The last piece is practice being calm. Again, this ties back to what we talked about from a emotional awareness side, right? We can train our brains to react or respond in a certain way. If stress relief for you in the office or at a seat is by yelling at other people, stop doing that. Right? Nobody likes that. Nobody likes that person. Right? Nobody likes being yelled at. Practice your breathing. Calm down. Right? Building a pause button to what's there. If you're in an office setting, right? Write down these negative, what you're feeling, and then tear it up. Look at it and then tear it up. Don't share it with anybody. I'm sure we've all, been upset at one point in time. We've ripped off an email that I'm going to show them, and then we sat and we looked at it, we read it, and it was like, no, I'm not going to send it. I feel better now. I said what I wanted to say, and it's gone. Right? Don't hit the send button. Make sure you hit the delete button. Right? But it gives us an opportunity to look at it and go and kind of examine, why was I feeling this way? Am I being defensive, or is there some truth that's there? Right? But here's the thing: every time we calm ourselves down and we don't become angry or upset, we rewire our brain towards a higher level of self-regulation. Motivation. And people who are have a high degree of emotional intelligence are usually very highly motivated. They're willing to defer immediate results for long-term success. They're highly productive. They love a challenge. And they're very effective at what they do. And while everybody might be motivated by certain things like money or status, in Goldman's model, he refers to motivation for the sake of personal joy, curiosity, or just the satisfaction of being productive. In a chat box, let's just get some few answers in there. What motivates you to do your job? Why do you do what you do? And as we're waiting for the responses to come in, being able to re-examine that why is really a big deal, especially for those of us who've been in this criminal justice arena for a while, right? Because that why could have, that why, that intrinsic purpose of why we step forward may have faded over the years. So, Aaron, what do we got?
We have some great answers coming in. Certainly, the primary one is helping to make a difference, and variations on that, sense of helping others, satisfaction of helping others. I love helping people. A couple of people are indicating, the justice system just interests me. The recognition of supervisors and peers is certainly represented here. Self-respect, interested in making an impact and wanting to be a good team player. Some great responses. Thank you all.
Yeah, those are all really, really good. And again, when we look at some ways how do we reinforce that motivation piece, right? As I said, go back and revisit what brought you in the door. Why did you want to be in the area of criminal justice that you're in? And we joke about it. It's the great pay, the great hours. It's not. While it's service oriented, it serves a higher purpose, right? And we can get beat down. Well, the last few years has not been kind to the criminal justice profession, but we still have folks that suit up every day, come out and do the job, and I'm deeply appreciative of that. Folks who are, another one is just to be optimistic, right? And I know it's easier said than done, but folks who are high on the emotional intelligence side are generally very optimistic. And it's a mindset that takes practice, but it's well worth the effort. Right? When you face a challenge, even if it's a failure, try to find at least one good thing that comes out of that situation. It could be something small, like you made a new contact, or it could be something with a long-term effect. This is an important lesson learned. You made a decision. It didn't go exactly the way it was supposed to go, or it blew up and didn't happen. Well, we just don't do that again. But we take parts and pieces from that and move forward. There's always positivity there if we want to look at it or look for it. Empathy. While the three previous categories referred really from our personal internal emotions, this one deals with the emotions of others. Empathy is a skill. It's the practice of reading the emotions of others and responding appropriately. And this is probably the second most important element of emotional intelligence. Empathy really is that ability to identify with and understand the wants and needs of others and the viewpoints of those around you. People who have high empathy are good at recognizing the feelings of others, even when those feelings may not be obvious. As a result, empathetic people generally are excellent at managing relationships, listening, and listening really is the primary empathy skill. And it's listening without judgment. We don't stereotype or judge too quickly. And we live our lives in an open, more vulnerable way. How do we improve our empathy? And again, it's cliche. We hear this all the time, but it's really putting yourself in somebody else's shoes. It's easy to support our own point of view. After all, it's ours, right? But if you take the time to look at a situation from somebody else's perspective and don't judge, and that's the hard part, because we always, from law enforcement, And criminal justice, we're constantly judging and evaluating people, right? That's the one piece that we have to work at. The second is paying attention to your body language. If you're listening to somebody, you cross your arms, or you're shuffling your feet, or you're staring off on them, you may actually be listening to what they're saying, but how is it viewed by the person who you're speaking with, right? About between 85 to 90% of communication is not what we say. It's the body language that we're giving off, the tone of our voice, the inflection of the words, and that. So it's just one of those things where we really have to, again, work and attend to those body language skills to show that we're open and that we're paying and that we're listening. And the last pillar is the social skills and communication. Right? Folks who are high in emotional intelligence are usually really easy to talk to. Right? They've got strong social skills, and they're good team players. They don't focus on their own success first, and they want to help others to develop and to shine. And they can manage disputes, and they're generally really good at building and maintaining relationships. Right? No matter where you're at in this criminal justice piece, right? Whether law enforcement, corrections, probation, courts, the clerk's office, we all have to talk to folks, right? We all have to, we can have a 10-minute conversation with somebody, and that's the start of the formation of a relationship, right? So we need to get better at these communication skills. Again, so how do we build them better, right? Well, for a lot of what we do in criminal justice is resolving conflicts, right? So we need to be better at conflict resolution. And that can involve negotiations. It can involve de-escalation. It's all part of doing it correctly while maintaining a steady emotional balance. Right, and then the second piece is going back and addressing the body language piece again, right? Making sure our affect is correct. One of the things that I counsel FTOs on a lot, or academy trainers, is when we see these new folks coming in, to identify bad affect in them. Are we discussing something in class, or am I having a conversation with my trainee and he's uncomfortable or he's embarrassed by it and he laughs inappropriately or giggles, right? That kind of thing can, in a street environment, in a corrections environment, that can set off a chain of events that can get people hurt. And you get a corrections trainee, corrections officer, police officer out making a street contact, talking to somebody out in the street, and they say something, and it makes the trainee uncomfortable, and they start laughing, and now it's like, what are you laughing at? This isn't funny. It sets off this whole chain of events now, where we got to either calm them down, or hopefully it doesn't escalate. So again, attending to this body language piece from a communication standpoint is very important. So for some additional tips for building emotional intelligence, right? Yeah, we all want to be happy, right? But you're just going to have to accept sometimes that it's just not going to be there, right? Again, a lot of times we're driven to identifying, because of the way that our brains are wired, we're driven more towards more negative memories than we are positive, right? But I guarantee you, for most of us, there are way more happy times than there are negative. It's just the negative has a bigger influence on our memories than the happy side does. Start to identify the emotions in yourself and in others, right? It's not just from it's not mind reading, but if I can identify what's going on with somebody else, being vulnerable, about my own emotions and understanding at them. When we can make a connection with people. Plus, if I can identify my emotions quicker, they don't become disruptive. There's times when not all emotions have to mean something. You know, I wake up, I'm having a bad hair day. If you saw my picture, you get the joke. But rather than, you know, rummage around trying to figure out why do I feel the way that I do, I just get up, get dressed, go do my work. Eventually, I work myself out of that mood, right? And then I don't sit there and go, oh, why do I feel this way? And it just doesn't make me crazy. And then there's times when identifying when not responding is the best response, right? We're good with the one-liners, with the quick comebacks. We do it to our coworkers and stuff all the time. And again, it's one of those things where we've trained ourselves to do it. Well, we can train ourselves not to do it. There are times if somebody's told you something that's very personal, very uncomfortable for them, right? And you've got nothing to say. Probably the best thing to say at that point is, hey, thanks for sharing. I got nothing, but I appreciate the fact that, you know, you shared that with me. Two more things on emotion. The first is this concept of emotional contagion, right? And here's where, from a criminal justice standpoint, of being in control of your emotions is important. Because this theory of emotional contagion shows that people and groups can catch the feelings of others from behavioral mimicry. Right? And, you know, if you walk into a room, you're smiling, you have a lot of high energy, saying good morning to folks, you're much more likely to create that culture on your shift, on your watch, in your office, than if you're wearing a neutral expression. Folks around you are going to start to smile back and they're going to mean it. The other side of it is that if you come in and you're crabbing and complaining, you frequently express frustration, that emotion is going to affect your team members also. So people and groups can catch feelings from others. Why is all this important? Well, I'm going to introduce you to two folks who are friends. We all have them. The first is a caveman. The second is professor. Right? Caveman is reactionary. He's the guy who is in survival mode. When we have the amygdala hijacking that Aaron talked about in the beginning, this is the guy who takes over. Your amygdala controls where information goes in your brain. And without going into the whole pathways in terms of who gets what and how, anything that the amygdala senses as fear, and it could be anger, being upset, anxiety, generally goes off to caveman, right? And then he picks up the biggest stick he can find, so he wants to solve the problem. He's reactionary, right? But the professor, he's deliberate and he's response driven, right? And that's the guy that we need. We need the professor to be in charge of our brains most of the time, right? But if our emotions get the best of us, the caveman gets priority in the decision-making functions. But if we can limit that emotional overreach and not overreact, the professor gets to be in charge, or at least he's not screaming at the caveman to let him help. So from a journey standpoint, right, we want to make good decisions. But do we really do a deep dive in how we get to those decisions? Or do they just pop out of your head? And yeah, sometimes with me, they just do. Right? But there's a process that's there. So as we move forward, we're going to look at a couple of tools to help us make better decisions in complex, uncertain, or uncomfortable situations. One of them may be familiar to you, the other one not so much. Like any tools, they each have uses, they have their strengths and weaknesses, and they generally work well with any other of the types of tools that we have for decision making, incorporate pieces of law, ethics, or policy. All right, so next poll question. What model or models do you use for decision making? Are you using SWOT, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats? OODA, which is observe, orient, decide, act. Satisfice, heuristics or some other, and others, go ahead and type it in the chat box.
Great, Tom. And that polling is open. You know, of these, I actually haven't heard of the satisficing one. What is that one?
That comes from Gary Klein's naturalistic decision making in terms of sources of power. In the book that is out of his sources of power, where it is being able to get a solution to a problem that is occurring very quickly, leaving it open-ended so that you're able to manipulate it further as you're going down the line.
Got it. That's very cool. Well,
heuristics is rule of thumb.
Got it. Rule of thumb for heuristics. Sorry, I keep stepping on you. And we've got a couple of folks that are also Buddy suggested rapid. We've got Mout and NRA, a couple of other ones. I'm going to go ahead and close out the poll and share the results. Okay, 57% indicated OODA, 32% indicated SWOT, and then 7% had other, with 2% indicating heuristics and 1% satisficing.
Cool. Good. I'm not surprised at the OODA number, primarily because of what we do, and it's been used in law enforcement for a long time. So much of what we decide is based on how we view the world through our own lens, right? And while might have similar lenses, everybody's prescription's unique, right? And that unique prescription generally is where our biases are. Right? So there are those of us who thrive in uncertain, rapidly evolving, nonlinear situations. Right? It could be the way that our brains are wired, the way we were raised, where we were raised, how we were trained, or even the level of experience that we have. My journey in decision making, critical thinking, dealing with uncertainty has been a long one. Being emotional resilient or even anti-fragile, to borrow a phrase from Nassim Taleb, wrote a book called Anti-Fragile, wrote a couple other books, Skin in the Game, Beta Procrustes, and a few others, helps us make better decisions. My first really light bulb moment occurred a long time ago when I was in my first master's program back in 1995. And I was introduced to this book, The Fifth Discipline, by a guy named Peter Senge. And it was the concept of systems thinking. And it was really, at the time when I looked at it, different than almost anything else that I'd seen before. And in the book, Senge talks about 5 areas of being: personal mastery, mental models, developing a shared vision, team learning, and systems thinking. And what was eye-opening about it was a better understanding of what you're dealing with and how things are related. A lot of times we're taught to break down problems to its smallest component and then put it all back together. And there are times when we do that, we fix certain areas, but sometimes the cure is worse. Sometimes the fix is worse than the problem as it was going down. That we eventually, when we put it all back together, creates. And in the intervening years, there's been hundreds of books, articles, videos that I've seen. But this kind of started that whole process, right? And if we look at this quote from Senge, in learning organizations, leaders are designers, stewards, and teachers. They're responsible for building organizations where people continually expand their capabilities to understand complexity, clarify vision, and improve shared mental models, right? And how we think about how we accomplish what we do, right? And that's really, from a responsibility standpoint, something that we need to do. Like I said, decision-making models to me are not static. We should always hang a question mark on, why do I believe what I believe? Right? We can look at this quote from Einstein, and I love this. We can't solve our problems using the kind of thinking we were used when they were created. Right? So as we're going through, and especially now in this complex environment, in the demands that are being made or asked of law enforcement, now, right, we've got to come up with a new way of thinking. And we look at this quote from Thoreau. The question is not what you look at, it's what you see, right? How we perceive the world drives how we react and respond to it. Working to increase your emotional intelligence helps to increase your situational awareness. You're less affected by disruptive emotions, and you have better self-control. That EQ is an important tool in managing our decision-making abilities. Uncertainty, chaos, complexity can all cause a stress response that puts the caveman in charge. Changing our lenses, seeing the world differently, sometimes challenging or changing what we believe, helps us in decision making. So we're going to look at a couple of tools to help us with this training side of it. The first one, again, is the OODA Loop. The second one is the Cynefin sense-making framework, which is probably not as well known, right? From our poll question, the OODA Loop was the one that was being used the most, right? And for most of us, you've probably seen it this way and maybe only this way. And it was developed by a gentleman named Colonel John Boyd. He was a fighter pilot in the Korean War and in Vietnam. He was credited with giving us the designs that we have in a lot of our airplanes now that give us air superiority, so to speak, in the world. Right? But the OODA Loop consists of observe, orient, decide, and act. From a process standpoint, right? It's a loop. A lot of folks say we use it as a decision-making model, and again, they use it as a decision-making model. I kind of liken it more to like a thinking model. And while we use it, it's not so much from a standpoint of using it, it's more we feel it, right? We use all our senses in it, which again, from an emotional intelligence standpoint, has strong context coming back to it. But this is a very simple loop diagram. And while I'm a big believer in simplicity, to me, this is just a little bit too simple. OODA shines in complex nonlinear events, right? But when it's depicted as a simple loop, it doesn't give us a really comprehensive understanding of just how powerful that OODA loop is. And I say we, and I include me in this, is a lot of times when we have a frame of reference or we're taught something and it's handed down, right? We just continue to simplify it as we go along. They're really from Boyd's presentations that he had given through the military over the number of years, and in his writings, there's only been one diagram where he really kind of explained what the OODA Loop meant to him, and it's in this diagram here, right? And when we look at it, it's really a double loop. There's two sides of it. There's an implicit guidance and control on the top side, and then there's multiple feedback loops down on the bottom side. When we look at everything that goes into it, there's feedback loops that constantly go through it. That orientation phase really is the most important piece of this OODA Loop. Now, and I've made this mistake, and I've heard other people refer to it when they talk about the orientation piece, is where you're standing when you're looking at something. If you look at all the stuff that's in there, your cultural traditions, your ability to analyze and synthesize information, your previous experiences, to be able to update what's going on with new information, where you were raised, all play a huge piece in this, right? And one of the things that we want to be able to do with this is use this to help us, and while we can't physically do it, but to slow time down for us and speed it up for whoever we're dealing with, right? And that's really part of that de-escalation that we talk about. We want to slow situations down, right? And it helps us to have the ability to run more loops. Right? Now, this can be a little confusing. So I'm going to put some pictures on this to kind of give us a little bit different visual, maybe to make a little bit more sense out of it. The picture itself came from a very dear friend of mine, a guy named Lou Hayes. He's a sergeant in the suburban Chicago department. We have taught, collaborated, and argued on many issues over the years. And this morning before the webinar, we were back at it again today. I consider Lou an expert in OODA, although he'll deny it. Please give his website and his ideas a look at the Illinois. It's all one word, the IllinoisModel.com. OODA has multiple feedback loops, right? When we look at that top loop, that implicit bias loop, that's where caveman lives, right? That's that something bad happens, we need immediate response. We need to react to what we see. It's the speed loop. It's quick, it's dirty, it's necessary for survival as long as we don't overreact, right? The detective, he's looking for clues, looking for information, clues to feed patterns to us to help with our intuition. And that forward feeds into that orientation phase. And again, look at everything that's in there, right? That's where your EQ sits. That's where your IQ sits. Our ability to make sense of current and new information that's coming in. Both explicit and implicit bias lives there. It's our file drawer for our lives. And the Cynefin sense-making model also fits nicely into that box. Right? Here's where that ability to self-assess and self-regulate are important. And again, if our EQ is in check, it allows us to respond rather than driving it into overreaction, right? And that bottom loop, the bottom loop is the professor loop. When we forward feed out of orientation at the side, the decision really is a crystal ball. We don't know what's going to happen, right? But we put that decision back to the orientation cycle, right? And does it meet all our required expectations? We're hoping it's going to take place. We put it out, we act on it. Again, there's another loop that comes back again. So we're constantly testing and going through what's there, right? Again, if we can slow things down, the more loops that I have, the better the process becomes. So again, it may not be exactly the OODA that you were exposed to, but this is really from a standpoint of how we put OODA together, and from the original intentions of Boyd in terms of how he viewed it. Obviously, without the caveman and professor and all the other stuff that's in there, is really the process that's involved. Right? And I want to talk a little bit about can of worm problems, right? So again, poll question number 3 is, what is a can of worms? Is it fish bait? Is it bird food? Is it a survivalist lunch? Or is it an incident or event when it's over that causes us to say, what just happened?
Okay, so I love this question here, especially the third response, a survivalist lunch. That's fantastic. Thanks for injecting humor into this. Overwhelming response, but we'll give folks about another 5 seconds to go ahead and submit their thoughts. Folks, we're getting close to the end, so if you do have any questions for Tom, now's the time to start typing them into the GoToWebinar toolbar, and then we'll take as many of those as we can at the end of the formal presentation. Tom, I'm going to go ahead and close out the poll, and I'll share those results. 92% of the audience indicated an incident that causes us to say, what just happened? And of course, 6% said fish bait. Back to you, Tom.
Great. Again, can of worms is a good proxy when it's acceptable to say we don't know. Right? But a lot of times it really combines anger, fear, uncertainty, unknowns, things that are unknowable, right? And they contribute to that feeling, which can impact our ability to make decisions in complex or uncertain framework. I use can of worms really for what the more technical or scientific name is that they use when we talk about this Cynefin framework, and they use this analogy of what they call wicked problems. They don't have an answer. They don't have 100% answer. It's generally is what you can live with. So here's the Cynefin model. The Cynefin sense-making model. It was developed by a gentleman named Dave Snowden about 20 or so years ago when he was working for IBM. Cynefin is a Welsh word that really doesn't have an English equivalent, but can best be described as habitat or a place where you're standing. And again, when we kind of tie back to OODA, when we look at that orientation phase, right? It's a sense-making tool that helps us categorize events and to help us to figure out and make sense of what we're dealing with. On the right is the ordered side, so the clear and complicated. On the left is the disordered side, where we look at complexity or chaos. Ordered is easily understood. Disordered is uncertain, multi-layered, nonlinear, and really doesn't have any clear answers. That's that disordered side is really the one that causes us the most problems, since we're looking for right answers. And sometimes the correct answer on that disordered side is what's good enough for right now. Cynefin helps us to understand and assist with our emotional regulation also. Right? When we're less surprised by what's taking place, when we have an easier ability to make sense of things, we have greater control over our emotional reactions and how we understand and break down and solve events. When we look at each of the frames themselves, right, in that clear frame, that deals with best practices, right? What works, what's simple. Our policies and procedures sit there. The way we do things, how we do them, generally across the board from a law enforcement correction standpoint, probation standpoint, from a best practice arena sits there. Complicated uses good practices. There are generally technical challenges where we might need an expert to solve the problem itself. Complex is in a lot of the issues that we deal with in law enforcement and criminal justice side reside in that complex framework, because we don't know what a lot of times we're going to come out the other side of the event. They use this word exactive practices, and really in dealing with from an exactive standpoint, it involves a lot of trial and error. We're trying to find what is going to have the best intervention to mitigate what we're using. And then the last one is the chaotic or the chaos framework. There we have to act to bring stability, right? The very first thing in a chaotic situation that you need to do is normalize the event. It has to stop, and then we can bring it back. So whatever actions we need to make the chaos go away, we need to take. We need to do that, and then learn from it and kind of work back through the system. So we're going to expand this out just a little bit more, and then we'll fill it in to see how it helps us understand events as we go through them. So first is an understanding of kind of the environments that we have in the criminal justice side, right? We have our rule side, we have our adaptive side, and then we have that creative side. And again, rules, your policies and procedures, the different methods that we have to try to solve problems. Adaptive is what are we going to use to make this work? The creative side, that's where we really have to come up with new solutions to solving the problems, right? And that area between complexity and chaos is really where the creative environment shines. When we look at the clear side, that clear box again, right? They're problems, and they're simple. They're easily understood. It usually involves the use of best practices, and it's finite. Finite from the standpoint of there's an end that's going to be achieved, and hopefully, and it's going to make the problem go away, or at least it's going to make the problem better. And complex, or complicated, I'm sorry, it's not as easily understood. It's probably going to take an expert or somebody with technical expertise to be able to help solve the problem. Again, it's finite. There's an end that's going to occur. When we get into complex, right, it's not as easily understood. It could be quickly developing, or it could develop quickly. It could develop slowly. It's generally multi-layered. There are unknowns, there are unknowables that are there, and it's almost infinite because there's so many different layers to it that we kind of want to get to what's going to fix it right now for us. And the last one is chaotic. Again, it's unknowable, right? But it's fast. It relies on survival. It could be novel practices that come out of it, right? Because again, we have to stop the chaos. An interesting thing here, and again, is being able to put that disorder, and it's changed. I haven't gotten a new slide for it yet, but the disorder box now kind of goes into confusion. It's not disorder anymore. If we try to apply the wrong solution to the problem, if we put it in the wrong box, it can create confusion in terms of why it doesn't work correctly. That line between chaotic and clear is, where's it at? There we go, complacency. And it costs a lot to get out. In the criminal justice model, right, there's been an effort to push a lot of things that we do over to the ordered side of this, either the clear or in the complicated. And my view, again, this is my opinion, is that, when we do that, we're starting to create a state of risk avoidance rather than risk management that a good policy generally will do. Right? But when the policy doesn't match the reality of the situation, it creates additional confusion or uncertainty for our personnel who are already dealing with a complex or chaotic situation. Applying clear solutions to clear problems makes sense, but applying a clear solution to a complex or chaotic situation will generally push you over the cliff of complacency, and it's going to cost a lot of time, money, effort, and maybe organizational embarrassment to get out of it. Again, this is something that a lot like the OODA Loop, you experience more than we use, and once you get a handle on it, your mind just kind of points you to where you need to go from an understanding from a problem level. Big fan of Simon Sinek. Read most of his books. He says intelligence uses what is known to solve problems. Creativity uses what is known to discover possibilities. Right? But when we look at some of the advances that have occurred in law enforcement in the last couple of years, right? But one of the things I'll point back to the shooting, to the unfortunate instance of school shooting in Columbine, right? Current police practice at the time was surround, call out, call SWAT, right? Then we got into the development of rapid deployment, right? We need to stop the chaos being killing, right? And then we can manage that event once that chaos is stopped. But it took an unfortunate event. It took a complete readjustment of law enforcement training to be able to get there. But it took that chaotic event, and we learned from it. So again, as Einstein says, we can't solve our present problems using the level of thinking which they use to create them. If we combine emotional intelligence with the OODA loop, with the Cynefin sense-making framework, it helps us to manage, especially these complex, uncertain problems better. Quick blatant plug for where I'm going to be. You have that list there in the handouts that are there. Please head over to the website. You can view the calendar of events that are there. You can register for it, or if you want to host a class, contact information's there. Please reach out and we'll make it happen. I want to say a big thank you, not only to you for spending the last hour with us, but also to Aaron for giving me the opportunity to be here. Thank you for what you do. I appreciate it. There again is our contact information if you want to get a hold of me. And Aaron, I hope we got some questions. I'm ready.
Oh, Tom, we always have great questions for your webinars. And thank you. I don't know if you're keeping count, but this is your 12th webinar with Justice Clearinghouse. And we're truly honored to have you and have you back. And folks, you may have already noticed this, but Tom is back with us on April 12th to talk about lateral hire onboarding field training for the experienced officer. And again, that webinar is on April 12th. So if it sounds like something you might be interested in, go to the Justice Clearinghouse website, look for that date under webinar schedule, and you should be able to register for that between now and April 12th. Folks,
and I'm going to be at May 26th. I'm doing adaptive leadership in terms of building trust to keep your officers and employees from fleeing.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Tom. Okay, I would love to start working through our way through these questions. First question comes from Heath. I love this question. Can empathy and decision making, even though it goes against objectivity, be encouraged for police officers in training as a way of guarding against burnout or fatigue?
I want to say yes. From and again, from the standpoint of there are times where, and I hope I'm going to answer this the right way. There are times that as a way to mitigate, a lot of times we say, well, this is what policy says I can do. But it may not necessarily be the right thing. It's right in terms of the policy, but is it morally or ethically right? And sometimes we get into this thought process of I want to do the right thing, but how are my bosses going to look at it? Again, we kind of point back to the fifth discipline book when we talk about mental models, right? How does the organization think, and how is that thinking brought forward? And what are the mental models that is the organization supportive of the individual officers addressing problems uniquely based on the circumstances, or do they just want them to follow the rules? And I think that causes cognitive dissonance in there, because we know what we would want to do. We know ethically or morally what's the right thing to do, but the rules say we need to do this. And I think that dissonance in there really creates a level of burnout, because we get frustrated because we want to do the right thing for somebody else from an empathetic, ethical, moral standpoint, but our rules tell us that we can't. So there's some of it may point from an organization standpoint in terms of what's acceptable. It might even be that way on a shift level. But if the organizations move towards a more level emotional intelligence model, I think a lot of this burnout that we experience from those decisions would go away, because we put that decision making, we put the solution bases to the officer, and really from a community policing standard, that's really what we're striving to push to. I hope I answered that the right way.
Thank you, Tom. I know it's a challenging question and has, of course, a lot of parameters with that. So really appreciate it, Heath. If you have a follow-up, please do feel free to type that into the GoToWebinar toolbar, and we'll definitely try to get to any follow-up questions. Next question is from Christy. It's from your slide 37, Tom. She was wondering if you can explain exaptive practice.
Yes.
And I hope I pronounced that correctly.
Yes, you did. Exaptive practices really are taking things that we already have and using them for something else that they weren't intended for, or coming up with an entirely new, which makes an entirely new process. Again, I loosely use the Columbine example. Another one may be kind of like when we look at how I was taught to deal with suicidal subjects when I first started in law enforcement. You know, somebody calls up, hey, my relative says they're going to kill themselves. You know, whether, you know, they may say how, whether it's firearm, knife, pills, or whatever. We go to the house, we knock on the door. Hey, we want to talk to you. Let us come in. They say no. What do? We booted the door. We went in. We forced a confrontation. Right? Look at how we handle that now. We try to make contact. We may surround, try and call out. If we have no other indication that there's any harm that's been done, we don't see it. I know a couple of agencies, they take and they slide the suicide hotline down under the car, under the front door, say, hey, if you need anything, give us a call. They back off and they leave. Right? So when we look at how these things develop over time, right? This is and exaptive practices find their way into becoming either mainstream best practices, right? But it takes the time it takes. Sometimes it takes unfortunate incidents, bad outcomes, to come up with an exaptive practice that works, right? But again, it's stepping outside of, getting outside of what is normal, and applying different tests to see if it works, especially in that framework on the in the complexity side of things, where we're really not sure what's going to work.
Great. Thank you so much, Tom. Next question is from Matthew. How can the idea of EQ be best incorporated into traumatic stress and wellness training for staff?
I love that. Would incorporate the theory of mindfulness, right? In being aware of what our emotions are, addressing them as real, having a lot of times the stress that comes in, the burnout that comes in, comes from the idealistic viewpoints that we have coming into these professions, again, of wanting to help, wanting to lock up the bad guys, want to save the world. And then the truth of it is we only impact a very small piece of that. But it does ground us into reality. It teaches us to accept our emotions for what they are and to work with them. I've talked to some folks on the who specialize in that the PTSD traumatic side of this. Primarily, from a standpoint, my original question to them really is that hey, if folks who are high in empathy, do they suffer more PTSD, more traumatic responses maybe than from folks who don't? And they don't even have an answer to that question. And some of to get to the answers again involves money and that, but it does help us if to me it makes sense if you're balanced more emotionally, if you don't have these wide swings in emotions, if you can treat it's almost like self-care, where it helps you to be able to work through them. May not give you all the answers, but it's not going to maybe hit you as hard as it wasn't as if you're not as emotionally aware.
Great. Thank you so much for that. I did want to share a couple of comments from the audience, and feel free, of course, Tom, to weigh in on any of these. Interesting comment from Brittany, who said, I really like the 5 senses tactic where you use the things around you to come back into the moment. It works really well for me. Are you familiar with that one?
Not, you know what? I may have, but I'm going to say no.
Got it. Nope, I totally understand. I hadn't heard of it before either. Another comment from Rod. Rod said, in our minds, instead of asking, what's wrong with you, instead ask ourselves, what happened to you? And I think that's a really great suggestion as well. Thank you, Rod.
Yep.
Okay, Tom, I think we have time for one, maybe 2 more questions. Next one is from Maritza, who asks, do you think generational trauma plays into emotional intelligence?
I'm not sure what generational trauma is. I'm gonna guess from if it's the era in which we've grown up, which is where it's leading me to. It emotional intelligence could help it because it's one of those things where it helps us make sense of why we feel what we feel, and it keeps us more grounded and lets us respond to things and not get reactionary to them. I have severely limited my social media, because it's becoming a place of arguing rather than learning, and there's from a I come from my generation didn't have social media. I'm a digital immigrant. Um, and I can get frustrated reading some of these comments, and so, and it almost goes back to the previous comment where I want to go, "What's wrong with you?" Rather than just come in and maybe have a better understanding of why somebody thinks the way they do, or why does somebody think differently than we do. And I really think that emotional intelligence really gives us, folks who have a higher level of emotional intelligence have that ability to go put the brakes on it and go, okay, I get it. This is what you believe, right? And maybe from a framework of, okay, so help me understand this your way. And in the end, going to be adults. I may not agree with them. I may have a better understanding of it, right? But the way emotional intelligence works for us really leads us to being more grounded, and just less prone to the reactionary side of things.
Great, thanks, Tom. Really great response. As an aside, generational trauma generally refers to trauma and anxiety that is actually, as I understand it, that is actually passed down through the genetic code almost, from parent to the children. So,
Okay,
really do appreciate
that was going to be
that is of course accurate, but.
That was going to be my second guess.
And actually, Diana really said it extremely well. Generational trauma is related to historical family traumas, and even provided an example. The best example is the Native American culture and a history of trauma related to loss of land, deprivation of cultural practices, etc. So thank you, everyone. Tom, thank you so much for spending time with us today again on your 12th webinar. We're very excited to have you back in the coming months. Before we shut down for today, any closing comments you'd like to make?
Thank you for everybody for what you do. Keep your heads up. It's going to get better. I appreciate it. And there's a lot of people who appreciate your efforts. Thank you. Please join me in the coming months. And Aaron, thank you, and Chris again for the opportunity to be able to do this.
Absolutely. And I want to echo your sentiments. Thank you all so much for doing everything you do, for caring and trying to improve the lives of those around you and in your community. With that, this concludes this morning's Justice Clearinghouse webinar. Please, everyone, take care and stay safe. Bye now.